Vayishma'u tzarei Huda u'Vinyamin kivnei hagola bonim heichal Adonai Elohei Yisrael. Yesterday, we described the third chapter. The foundation of the Beit HaMikdash had been built. The rebuilding of the temple had happened as Cyrus had given the Jews permission. And now the adversaries, the enemies of Yehuda and Binyamin, heard that the returning exiles were building a temple to God. ויגשו אל זרובבל וראשי האבות ויאמרו להם נבנה עמכם כי חכם נדרוש לאלוהיכם. ולא אנחנו זובחים מימי עשר חדון מלך אשור מעלה אותנו פה. They came to Zerubbabel, and the chiefs of the clan said to them, let us build with you, since we too worship your gods, having offered sacrifice to him since the time of King Sharadan of Assyria, who brought us here. Now, time of the first Beit HaMikdash, while the first Beit HaMikdash was still standing, there were people who were brought to replace the 10 tribes, probably what we call today Samaritans, other local populations, and they say we worship the same God, and they want to help in the building of the Beit HaMikdash. ויאמר להם זרובבל וישו שאר ראשי האבות לישראל לא לכם ולנו לבנות בית לאלוהינו כי אנחנו יחד נבנה לאדוני אלוהי ישראל כאשר ציוונו המלך כורש מלך פרס. Zerubbabel and Yeshua, the rest of the heads of Israel, said to them, it's not for you and us to build the house of God. It is our obligation. It is our responsibility. And clearly, from the way the word was used, in the beginning, they were described as the adversaries, the enemies, right? You are not with us. It is our obligation. We have been instructed to do it, and sort of they're saying we do not worship in the way you do. Therefore, the people of the land, these Samaritans, these others who had been living in Israel for probably a couple hundred years at this point in time, they made it difficult. They undermined the returnees from the exiles' ability to rebuild the temple. V'sochrim, in verse 5, Aleim yoatzim la'afer otzatam kol mikorish melech paras v'malchut Daryavesh melech paras. And they bribed ministers in order to thwart their plans all the years of King Cyrus until the reign of King Darius. They just made it difficult for the Jews to do it. And for 20 or so years, the Jews were unable to truly, really rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And continuing verse 6, and interestingly, and then later on in the time of Achashverosh, in the beginning of his reign, they drew accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. Should know is, so how do we understand these verses? Many people today try to understand that the story of Achashverosh happens during the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. We were taught when I was in school that was in between the first temple and the second temple period. But here Achashverosh seems to be afterwards. You could say, no. The way that the verses is reading is that was in the middle, during the time before the second Beit HaMikdash was built. But we see that there is anti-Semitism. There are people who are going around who are making life difficult for the Jews. Uvimei ar tachashta katav bishlam matrodat havael shar kunato achashtarta melech pras uktav hanish tivan ktuv aramit u'meturgaman aramit. And in the time of Artaxerxes, Bilshan, and the rest of these guys, they wrote a letter in Persian, in Aramaic, and translated. So what's this letter? Rechum Baal Ta'im Shimshei Safra Katvu Igra Chada Yerushalayim Lacharstata Malcha Kanema. Rechum, the commissioner, and Shimshai the scribe write a letter to concerning Jerusalem to King Artaxerxes that says as follows. I'm just going to read it in English. Rechum, the commissioner, and Shimshai the scribe, and the rest of their colleagues were in verse 9. The judges, officials, officers, and overseers, right? The men of Erech, Babylon, and of Shushan, that is the Elamites, and all the other peoples whom the great glorious Asnapper deported and settled in the city of Samaria. And the rest of the provinces beyond the river wrote now. What did they write? This is the text of the letter which they sent to King Artaxerxes from your servants, men of the province beyond the river. Be it known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have reached Jerusalem, are rebuilding the rebellious and wicked city. They're completing the walls and repairing the foundations. All right, the Jews refer to these people. They want to help them. They refuse to allow them to help as enemies. And here in the letter, to deny the Jews the right to build the Beit HaMikdash, look what they call it, the wicked city. Now be known to the king that if the city is rebuilt and the walls completed, they will pay not tribute, poll tax, or land tax. In the end, it will harm the kingdom. Now, since we eat the salt of the palace, it is not right that we should see the king dishonored. We have written to advise the king of this, so that you may search the records of your fathers and find in the records and know that this city is a rebellious city, harmful to kings and states. Sedition has been rife in it from early times on. That account, the city was destroyed. We advise the king that if the city is rebuilt and its walls are completed, you will no longer have any portion in the province beyond the river, right? If you allow this temple to be built, they're going to rebel. And now in verse 17, the king sends back the following message to Rechum, the commissioner, Shimshai the scribe, and the rest of their colleagues who dwell in Samaria and in the rest of the province and beyond the river. Greetings. In verse 18, the letter that you wrote me has been read to me in translation, just like I'm reading in translation. At my order, a search has been made and has been found that the city has from its earliest times risen against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been rife in it. So he responds to the letter and says, you're right. These were people who in the past have rebelled. And that's something we're going to see. We're not going to see it personally, but go to the Roman Empire, for example. All the other peoples all over the world, basically, the Romans took them over and they agreed to what Rome wanted. They'll take the Roman culture, they'll take the Roman gods, they'll take the whatever it might be. The Jews, who perhaps it was because of a unique culture, perhaps it was because of a monotheism, they refused to just allow the Romans to, they allowed the Romans to rule over them in a way that would negate whom they/we were back then. And so he's not wrong in what he says here. The Jews have a very specific ideas of the way that we live our lives, and we're not just going to give in. And continuing in verse 20, powerful kings have ruled over Jerusalem and exercised authority over the whole province beyond the river, and the tribute, poll tax, and land tax were paid to them. Now issue an order to stop these men. The city is not to be rebuilt until I so order. Take care not to be lax in this matter. There will be much damage and harm to the kingdom. So the king, who in the past has allowed, now they're denying the ability for the Jews to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. When the text of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read before Rechum and Shimshai the scribe and their colleagues, they hurried to Jerusalem to the Jews and stopped them by force. Now we're told in verse 24, Be'edin betelat avidat Beit Eloha di Birushalayim v'avid betala ad shnat tartin l'malchut Daryavish melech Pra. So at that time, the work on the house of God, Jerusalem, stopped and remained in abeyance until the second year of the reign of King Darius of Persia, some 20 years later. So for 20 years, the Jews are not allowed to rebuild the temple. It's going to tell us it's sort of time jumps in history to the end of the period, but the Jews are accused of being a rebellious city and not one who takes it, and that is true. So coming back in this chapter, the people who are here, the enemies, are likely Samaritans and other people transplanted way back in the about 200 years before this, around 720 or so before the Common Era, and they had, they worshipped God. It says in that chapter back then. If we go back into Melachim Bet, it talks about the exile of the 10 tribes in the northern kingdom. The Samaritans are moved in. They're not called the Samaritans at their time. They're later called the Samaritans because Samaria, like the Shom Road. So they're later called the Samaritans. They're worshiping other gods. They're being killed by lions, and they don't know why. And they ask what's wrong, and they say they're not worshiping the God of Israel. And they form some sort of syncretistic religion, where on the one hand they worship the God of Israel, but on the other hand they do not abandon their other gods. And so the returning exiles reject their offer because they are not fully truly monotheists and worshipers of God. And here as well, just right, we have Cyrus is the one who originally gives the permission. Then Darius, the temple is rebuilt during the reign of Darius. We talk about Achashverosh, who's probably afterwards, and we talk about Artaxerxes. The Artaxerxes part, it's a question of whether or not this is something that happens later. Is there maybe a name that's used that's mistaken? But we see here, and this is, I guess, we think about it today, is that it wasn't simple then, and it's not simple now. And the accusations are not wrong. The Jews were rebellious. They're rebellious against the Babylonians. We didn't want Babylonian takeover. We wanted to be who we were is who we wanted to be. We didn't want to be culturally oppressed. We didn't want our culture, our religion, our way of life to be taken away from us. And that's what was forced upon us by many people. And we always rejected us. Or we rejected it. We didn't reject us. We rejected it. And that's one of the great hallmarks of the Jewish people and the missions of the Jewish people, to be perfectly honest, in my opinion, is to remain true to who and what we are, irrespective of the minority culture. That's who we are. That's who we need to be. And this chapter demonstrates it. It's said here in a bad way. We are rebellious, right? But sometimes rebellion, just like we have in the Torah, where God says to Moshe that we are a stiff-necked people. That's how we are described in Am Cheoref. Well, you know what? Sometimes being an Am Cheoref, sometimes being a stiff-necked people is exactly what we need to be.